Hey, what's up everyone? Welcome back to the channel. This video is going to show you how to assemble the Lolo brand 6-load bike rack, and I am going to make it simple for you. Your box will show up. The instructions are actually online. They're not going to be in the box themselves. It's a great bike rack. I love mine, and I'm going to show you super easy way to do it and what you're going to need, okay? So to start with, you're going to need 2 people minimum for the assembly, and you need to make sure that you actually have your vehicle in an area where you can assemble it on the vehicle. It does tell you in the instructions the easiest way to do it is to assemble the bike rack on the vehicle, so make sure it's out in a location where you can easily assemble it all onto the vehicle as you go. All right, so without further ado, we're going to get going. If you haven't yet, make sure you hit that subscribe button if you're new to the channel. And at the end of this video, if you enjoy the content, give me a thumbs up. If you got any questions after the video is over, I'm happy to answer those. Drop those in the comments below. I'm also going to leave a link to the actual instructions for the bike rack in the description as well. So check that out. And without further ado, let's get started. All right, first things first, make sure you have a partner that is willing to do all of the work for you while you stand by, drink coconut water, and hang out in the nice sun. All being said, you do need a second pair of hands, and my wife loves these type of projects, so it was worked out well for me that she jumped right in to get started with this project with me. So the bike rack itself will come very well packaged. Shout out to Lolo there too as well. But the first thing you want to do is open everything up, lay everything out. They've got the different bolts, nuts, washers, everything in the different packages via different steps. So it'll be labeled 1, 2, and 3. Again, you want to download the instructions from loloracks.com and make sure you go to loloracks.com/assembly, and that is your website to find the most recent edition of these instructions. Okay, so once everything's laid out, you've got everything organized and set the way you want, and you have room to set up your vehicle to start assembling the rack, like I said, on the vehicle. The first thing you want to do is find your hitch bar, which is the piece that'll go right into your hitch itself. And there's a bolt that comes with that. There's a lock on the other end that comes with that. And then there's a key that we'll be able to unlock and lock that side of the bolt itself. Again, these are instructions that are on there. So then your first step is to slide the nut plate into that bar for the hitch itself. And I actually didn't quite record that because I was showing my wife how to get it in, and we had to get everything kind of wiggled. I have a video here that I'm going to splice in from Lolo Racks themselves showing you how to slide in that nut plate easy.
All right, to install the nut plate, I got the nut plate, grab it like that. Kind of just squash that down like that. Then sneak it in. If you need to go further, get a handy dandy tool. Like that.
Okay, quick note on that. Getting into the second hole is ideal if you can into your hitch, if your hitch is deep enough. I have a 2018 4Runner that we're assembling this rack on, and my hitch was deep enough. However, my spare tire ran right into that bar on the second hole once I slid it in there. So I was only able to go to the first hole as you saw in that previous video. So keep that in mind. Ideally, as much beef of the metal that you can get into that hitch is better, but in this case, I could not. So it depends on your vehicle. Keep that in mind for different vehicles and tow hitches.
Until it all lines up together. Then if you need to move it back, I get like a screwdriver or something similar. And then you kind of just sneak it back. Boom, just like that.
Okay, so there you go. Here my wife is actually sliding that nut plate into our bar for our tow hitch itself, and then we're going to actually go ahead and slide that onto the tow hitch and run the bolt through next. Okay, so next step is actually sliding the receiver tube into the tow hitch itself, into the car hitch. So now you're going to actually need to bust out your tools, and those are going to include a 5/8 socket or a wrench. and that's for the locking hitch bolt itself that holds that receiver in place. You're also going to need some 3/4 wrenches or sockets, and a 9/16 inch wrench or a socket as well. Socket sets work great. I've actually used my impact driver installing the larger bolts because it goes quicker, but I wouldn't recommend that unless you understand how to use an impact driver itself, because you don't want to over tighten any of these bolts. Okay, so once you get that bolt on, just loosely tighten it, and you can even do that by hand. Again, if you don't know how to use an impact driver, I wouldn't even worry about it. Socket wrench will be just fine for this. Make sure you're not adding any hip adapters or extensions as well. Lolo will warn you of this in their instructions. It's not a good idea. It's actually going to void the warranty, and it can get super dangerous. So keep that in mind. Again, slide that on, and then you're going to put the sleeve that comes with it on the other side next to the locking pin. My sleeve didn't quite fit because of the way that the 4Runner's hitch is shaped. I ended up cutting my sleeve down a smidge to get it to fit. I, again, don't recommend doing that unless you know how to cut this type of metal. Actually, I'm pretty sure Lolo's not going to want you to do that either. So keep that in mind. The sleeve isn't necessary. It's good to have that, but again, if yours doesn't fit, don't cut it. I wouldn't recommend that. I modify mine a smidge just to make it fit nice and smooth. Once you've tightened down that bolt and put the sleeve on, put on the locking pin and lock it in place to make sure everything fits nice and tight, and you're ready to go on that section. All right, next step is to assemble the 2 angle braces onto the hitch receiver, and these braces are going to receive your vertical piece to the bike rack itself. It's the main vertical piece that goes on the bike rack. So you need to grab your 1/2-inch bolts and all 12 of the washers in that bag for the 1/2-inch bolts, and you're going to slide them right on in there as follows. They're going to receive both holes, and it's going to go top bolt, then washer, and then washer on the other end. So you have washers sandwiched between this vertical piece, and then you're going to have a washer on the outside of those braces, and then your bolt, okay? So those washers basically are protecting the metal and actually creating a good cinch when the bolt goes through, all right, if that makes sense. You have a washer on each side of the vertical piece and then each side of the braces itself. So a total of 12 washers are going to go on here, okay? Setting these on here loosely is the key. You want to tighten them down so the angle braces don't joggle around, but you don't want to over tighten them until all of the bolts and washers are assembled. The next step is then going to be installing the red pin itself, and this red pin actually acts as the piece that can allow this bike rack with Lolo to tilt out of the way in order for you to be able to open your tailgate or the back and to kind of maneuver around for all of your other gear that's going into your vehicle. Okay, once you have the first bolt in and the red pin slid into the 2 holes at the base of the receiver bar that goes into your hitch, then you're going to install the rest of the bolts into those angle braces themselves. And again, the assembly as follows. You're going to have a total of 3 bolts and 4 washers per bolt. It's going to go bolt, then washer on the other end on the outside of the faceplate and on the inside of the faceplate up against the vertical bar. And then the same thing on the other end for those washers. You're going to have a washer right against the other side of the vertical bar. Then you're going to have a washer on the outside of the angle plate. And then you're going to have your nut that goes on at the end. Okay, so again, 3 bolts, 4 washers per bolt. That's a total of 12 washers on there. Again, that's just protecting the actual metal itself, and it creates a nice pinch for the bolt to hold in place without any rubbing. As you can see right there, we are setting everything on there just hand tight for now until everything's lined up, the pin's in, and then we can go ahead and test everything, tighten everything down. And again, I'm using my impact driver with the large bolts, but a socket wrench will work just fine, or a 5/8 wrench itself. Something I'd like to point out here as you're grabbing that vertical bar to install and you're looking at the logo, that logo of Lolo racks faces out the back away from the vehicle. It's not one side or the other. It faces directly out as you're looking at it from the back of the vehicle. That will help you. Here I'm just tightening everything down one last time with the impact driver. Again, you make sure you don't over tighten any of the bolts, whether you're using an impact driver or a socket wrench or just a 5/8 wrench itself. And then once you have everything nice and tight, the red pin is in, go ahead and tighten that last bolt on the receiver hitch bar, and then go ahead and test that red pin as well. All right, next step is to install the top crossbar. This is the flat bar that goes on the top of the rack itself. It's not the lower tire bar that has all the teeth and notches in it. So first step, you want to locate the two larger holes in the center of this bar. They're going to line up with that top flange, the top of the vertical piece. Then you're going to take your 1/2-inch bolts and you're going to install in the same fashion. So you're going to have a bolt with a washer on each end next to the hex head. Slide those bolts through. Then you add a washer to the back end of those bolts. And then you want to go ahead and add your nuts. Obviously, having 4 hands here is better than 2. Tighten those down. Make sure everything's lined up, and then you can go ahead and fully tighten down this connection, because the next step is going to be adding the hanging bars for the bikes themselves. And again, you can see here, I've got my impact driver. One end is holding the nuts. The other end is using the impact driver to tighten them down. Your socket wrench or your adjustable wrench is just fine in this situation as well. Make sure you get them nice and tight. It'll be super hand tight. Do not over tighten these nuts. It's super important. You never over tighten nuts and bolts on any system. Just make sure it's not jiggling around, and go ahead and test them with your wrench by hand as well when you're ready to go. All right, next step is installing the hooks on that top crossbar. So you're going to need to go grab all the dome head bolts and your 9/16 socket or your wrench, get them all in hand, and work as a team on this as well. So you're going to do the same thing. You're going to slide these bolts in. You want to make sure on these dome head bolts that the square portion drops right into the hole on the back of this bar, which is the facing towards the back of the rack itself. Okay, so you slide that bolt through, make sure it's locked in place, and then slide your nut on the back end. And the best way to do this is to have one person hold those bolts in place so they don't slide out of that square notch in the back as you tighten them down. I wouldn't recommend using a socket wrench on our impact driver socket on this. Just go ahead and use your 9/16 hand socket and tighten each one of those down as you go, and then work your way back, finishing the tightening process. This is pretty simple. I had no issues with anything not lining up on this. It's very well made, and just run through each single one as I'm doing here. Tighten it down as your partner's holding that bolt in place, and again, make sure that that square portion drops into the square hole before you tighten them down. Otherwise, you're going to be fighting it the whole way. That square portion is holding that bolt in place while you tighten the nut. All right, now that you're done with that part, the next step is going to be installing the lower tire bar. So grab those shorter 1/2-inch 13 bolts, grab your washers, and when you set this bar on to the holes right in the middle of your vertical piece again at the bottom, just like the top, make sure that the tire notches are facing up. And that's the jagged end with the hooks and the holes. Make sure that end is facing up, pointing up to the sky, and you'll see why in a minute. So you want to go ahead and you want to tighten those bolts completely down with your socket wrench or your 9/16 wrench. And once that's secure, we're going to start installing all of the bungee hooks for the bike itself. All right, so the next step is going to be adding all of the bungees that come with this kit. So at the top, you have 2 holes on those hooks. Put 1 bungee in each hole, and then you're going to tie an overhand knot, as you're seeing me doing here. It's just basically a loop knot. You swing it around, up and through the hole. You want to leave about 1.5 inches of length at the end of each one of those bungees, okay? This will allow you enough length to go ahead and hook the handlebars up and over and into the notch. The same thing is going to apply to the bottom of the rack as well for the tire bar. You're going to have one bungee on the bottom bar, which is the tire bar. You can fiddle with the length of that end as needed for each bike, so just go with 1.5 to start. All right, once you get all the bungees in, now again, you're going to realize that the knot side is going to go in the hole, that's on the left, and then the bungee will be pulled across and up into the notch with the ball attached to the bungee itself. So this is how you install the bikes. You bring it up, flip it around, handlebars drop into the hooks, and then you take the bungee, you take the two top bungees, one goes around the handlebar on the left into the notch, the other one wraps around the outside of your stem of your bike and then back around the handlebars and back into the notch. So it's going across the handlebar. This keeps it extra secure and it keeps the handlebars from pulling across in high speed conditions. Secure the handlebars at the top with the two bungees and then secure the wheel on the bottom of the tire bar and move on to the next bike. After loading these once, I've realized it's actually easier to go from left to right. So keep that in mind as well. All right, guys, that's it. That's how you assemble the Lolo bike rack. This is the 6 mount, as I said. A shout out to Lolo Racks. You can follow them on Instagram, and I'll leave their link in the description below, loloracks.com. Love the rack. Super excited. Can't wait to use this thing all summer. Appreciate you guys for watching, and until next time, keep building.